My first paranormal experience occurred when I was about 4 or 5. My family lived in my biological dad's parents' house. They were heavily religious and had Christian decorations everywhere. Holy water by the front door, a display case of glass Jesus, Mary, and the 3 kings, lambs, and a manger, etc. A couple paintings of Jesus and Mary, Jesus nailed to the cross hanging by the hallway, the whole 9 yards. Honestly, I don't know how old the house is or anything due to the fact that I was very young and shy, but one night I had a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach that wouldn't go away. It bothered me so much that I got out of bed and went to my parents' bedroom and crawled into their sheets between them. I made sure to close the door when I got there, which is an important detail for later. When I finally managed to fall asleep, I had an odd dream. I was much older, wearing a business suit and holding a suitcase. There was a building in front of me that had black glass panes and a cement overhang above to protect pedestrians from the weather. A crowd of people who were all dressed in sharp apparel flowed in and out the front glass doors, while I stood off to the side. The area around said building was a white void, like it was the only thing existing in the world. There was no other option. So I walked towards the front, hesitating. Honestly, with all the people blocking my view, I almost missed the reflection staring at me in the window, but it grew more into focus the closer I got. The figure seemed masculine only because it lacked any feminine features. Its skin was slimy, dark blue that looked permanently wet and had a few strands of black hair dangling from its otherwise bald scalp. Its back was hunched and had arms that reached to its knees. The most frightening aspect, however, were not the red eyes staring at me. Oh no, it was the way it tilted its head ever so slightly to the left when it saw me, and smiled. His cheeks stretched nearly impossibly wide as jagged, sharp teeth greeted me with large gaps between them. I froze in my place, merely feet from the ghastly reflection in the glass, people moving around me like water parting around a rock. Slowly, it lifted an arm to point upwards. It seemed like time had slowed down as I tilted my head up, not wanting to look away from the creature, but needing to see what it wanted to show me. There, above my head, was a K on the cement. It seemed to be written in the same thing that coated his skin, making it dark blue and possibly slimy to the touch. At the time, my name began with the letter K, so I thoroughly freaked out. When I looked back at him, he waved and I woke up. But it didn't end there. I heard the slapping of wet, bare feet along linoleum, which we had in the kitchen, and following each 2 steps was the sound of chains and something heavy dragging on the floor. I wanted to hide myself beneath the covers, scream, wake my parents up, anything, but I found myself stuck in place, eyes wide as I stared at the now open bedroom door. It seemed like I laid there for ages, waiting for the creature to show itself to me, until it finally stepped into my view. It stopped right outside the doorframe, looking in at me with those same beady red eyes. It was no longer bare, but had thick chains around its arms, shoulders, and legs. On the end of each chain were large cement blocks that I was sure tore up the carpet in the living room. It stared at me for a moment before giving me the same unsettling grin. Seeming to struggle a moment, it managed to lift a hand up and motion with its pointer finger for me to follow it before turning back the way it came and leaving. Suddenly able to move, I got out of bed. My little body was trembling as I padded softly to the door and looked up. Another blue K was written on the ceiling. I don't know why I followed the creature into the living room, but I just felt a gut instinct to do so. It led me through to the hallway, then the dining room, before stopping and turning to me again. I stopped, not wanting to get too close to this thing. It pointed forward one last time before it walked out of my view. I waited a second before continuing on into the kitchen and looked ahead. The gas stove was on fire, and my eyes nearly popped out of my head. Running back to my parents, I shook them awake and practically sobbed about the flames. They bolted awake and into the kitchen, but didn't find the blazing flames I had described. It was merely a small fire, like someone had lit the gas to start cooking. However, it was still a dangerous thing to have on while being unattended. I thought I had been dreaming, or perhaps imagining the Blue Man, as I've taken to calling him, and calmed my frantic heart. I don't know what drove me to look up in that moment, but I did. And what frightened me most was the large blue K above my head as my parents left the room. The following morning, I asked them about last night, and they said they had, indeed, been woken up by me to put out the stove fire. I haven't seen the creature since. This next event takes place quite some time after this. 4 of my 5 sisters and I were adopted by our biological uncle and aunt after it was found out that our parents were beyond the point of abusive, and CPS was astonished all of us were even still alive. We were far away from that house and those people, and were trying to overcome the extreme PTSD instilled upon us. I was about 13 to 14 at the time, and shared a bedroom with my sister, who was a year older than me. We were getting ready for bed one night when I felt that unsettled feeling in my gut again. I couldn't quite place it and shrugged it off as paranoia or anxiety. My sis closed the door. Again, important. And switched off the lights before maneuvering her way to her own bed that's 2 arms length away from mine. The window was on the wall between us and shut, but we left the blinds open as the moon was soothing for us to look at when we couldn't sleep. We both suffer from extreme insomnia. The window itself is high enough off the ground that even a very tall person couldn't get in without a stool or ladder, despite the house not having an upstairs, as cement blocks kept it off the ground. By the time the digital alarm clock on my sister's side of the room read 12:15 a.m., I still hadn't fallen asleep. So I rolled over to get comfortable, now facing the wall with my back to the rest of the room. It was only a few moments later that I started to hear thumping coming from the darkest corner of the room, which is where our closet is, along with a pile of our dirty clothes. Now, we did have plenty of dogs at the time, but I distinctly remembered that none of them had been in our room when we turned off the lights, and I hadn't gotten up to open the door at all for them to have gotten in. I was a little confused and, admittedly, starting to feel an oncoming panic attack settle in when I started to hear heavy breathing right next to my ear. I squeezed my eyes closed and tried to focus on keeping my breathing slow and steady in case it was an intruder. I did think it could be my sister trying to wake me up, but that still didn't make me want to check. After the breathing continued on, I felt someone poke my shoulder gently, like they were trying to get my attention if I was awake, but not wake me up if I was asleep. My nerves went ballistic, like electricity was touching me through the thick blanket. When I didn't move or change my breathing, I felt the finger slowly slide down my thigh and leg and rest on my knee before it lifted away. The thumping had long since stopped, and even after the breathing left, I still didn't sleep. The next morning, I asked my sister if she let Balto, our littlest sister's dog, inside the room last night, and she stopped getting dressed for school and gave me a confused look. I thought you let him in, then out again last night. I heard his tail hitting the wall for a while. I stopped what I was doing as dread filled my stomach. I explained to her what had happened last night, and she admitted she hadn't been poking me at all or tried getting my attention last night. Then, with some reluctance, she told me what she had experienced that same night. She hadn't been able to sleep either, and at about 12:30 rolled over to face the window and clocked to check the time. There had been a girl standing between our beds, the moonlight helping my sister to make out some of her features. She said the girl had been wearing a white nightdress and her skin was very pale. Her hair was almost exactly like mine, except maybe a shade darker. She had smiled creepily at my sister, she said, and held up her hand like she was wielding a knife, but it was empty. My sister had thought it was me because of how similar we looked, down to the same height, eye color, hair, and even smile. They all say I can smile scarily when I try to be creepy. But when she looked at my bed, she saw me laying stock still under my blanket. She didn't tell me what happened after that, though, so I still have no idea how that interaction ended to this day. We moved out of that house after it was discovered a fire had been burning in the wall that my bed was pressed against. Before my aunt and uncle had moved to that house, however, it had been in a couple fires in the past. This last experience was more recent, and I'll admit I did instigate it. You see, the second youngest of us girls and I were interested in the paranormal since all of those things and more have happened. There are more stories I could tell, but this is already long enough without them. She told me she saw a video on YouTube where these supposedly psychic girls spoke to spirits by going into trance-like states while holding a pen in their hand over paper. Almost immediately, we wanted to try this. She turned off her bedroom light, put on some quiet, slow music to help us focus, and we each got a notebook and a pen. We took deep breaths and thought only of our questions in our minds, letting our hands wander and draw small patterns of their own accord. We didn't really get results and left it at that. I, however, wasn't satisfied. That night, I turned on some music box songs that always help me clear my head after having emotional outbursts and breakdowns, sat on my bed, and decided to try something a bit different. I wrote out my question on the paper while keeping my eyes closed, only concentrating on my question alone. My handwriting was extremely sloppy, so rereading it now is a bit difficult, but I had written, "Are you here?" It took a little while, but soon I felt a pressure on my arm and immediately let it go limp. What was written is next to impossible to read. All I can make out are a few E's, but not reading it for the time being, I simply wrote another question. "Can you talk to us?" Us referring to my sister and I, even though she wasn't with me in this session. The reply this time looked something like, "Can't," then goes on to, "Nope, can't." Now, by this point, I want to read what my hand is moving to write, so I open my eyes and try to make it out. Of course, I was pretty positive my hand was only writing what I wanted it to, kinda like being psychosomatic. Just for the kick of it, I decided to write one more sentence. "Hi, I'm my name. Who are you?" The pressure on my arm was a lot worse this time around, and my hand felt like lead as the response came. "I know you know me, too. Blue man, red eyes." Keep in mind, I had long since pushed any thought of that creature from my memories, as it was over 12 to 13 years ago since I was 4 and had him show me the stove on fire. Understandably freaked out, I responded with, "Goodbye. Leave, okay?" Instantly, I got a hold of my online friends and asked what I should do. They insisted that I try to talk to the blue man to see what he was. And let's just say, after a 9-page-long conversation in which it asked if I was scared, would only answer with "me" when I asked for its name, replied with "emotion, me" when I asked why I suddenly felt so sad, didn't reply when I asked how many entities were with me, and so on. I was physically panicking. I was shaking. I could feel my heart beating rapidly. I felt extremely hot despite my room being the coldest in the house, and I could hardly breathe. I closed the notebook without telling it goodbye, which went against what the ladies in the video said, as they insisted it was like a Ouija board, except worse, as the spirits were using you as a vessel to speak instead of the planchette, and laid down, covering myself up to my chin with my blankets. In the corner of my room, which was right beside the door, I saw a dark mass, much darker than the shadows around it. The mass was 6 to 7 feet tall and seemed to have broad shoulders. Where eyes would have been were red dots without anything to indicate pupils. It had no real features other than that. It just looked like a giant shadow, and I could no longer move my body despite how much I wanted to. When it seemed to start moving closer, I was able to reach over and open the dryer, as I currently sleep in the laundry room, which filled my bedroom with a dim light. I could now see around my room, but nothing was in the corner. I couldn't sleep in the dark for a long while after that, but have since gotten over the incident. The light in my room has a tendency to blow out every couple of weeks after I replace the bulb, but this is a very old house, so I'm not surprised. It doesn't even have insulation and is falling apart, really. The rent's only $500 a month, despite the house being on the main street in town that produces a lot of oil. Anyways, I'm sorry this was so long, and I'm pretty sure you won't read it all the way through, but I was wondering if you thought the incidents were connected, or if you knew why the entity my sister saw looked exactly like me when I never had a twin, or why the blue man helped me with the fire but scared the living daylights out of me later. At least one answer is all I'm looking for.